All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're talking college football, and we are at the semifinals of the college football playoff. 4 teams remain. Which 2 teams will advance to the championship game, the national title down in Miami, Florida? I'm joined by my co-host, Fresh. Fresh, how you doing, buddy?
Haps doing great. I mean, obviously, as we mentioned before, we're both irritated that our teams aren't playing in this round. But you know what? That's how it happens. You win, you lose, you draw, you move on. But we have 4 very, very, very talented football teams playing this upcoming week in the semifinals. And 2 interesting storylines we'll dive into a bit more. But one is a rematch, and the other one is 2 teams that are literally playing with house money and have nothing to lose. They've already surpassed expectations and riding the wave, which makes it kind of like, the America's team kind of mentality where we have a lot of that flowing around right here in the semifinal.
Yeah, there are storylines galore over in the Fiesta Bowl. So let's start over there. That's going to be played on Thursday night at 7:30. Right now, line is sitting at timer record 3.5 points. Miami is the favorite. Over under is set at 51.5. Ole Miss has every reason under the sun to kind of quit. Lane Kiffin leaves them at the altar after they're basically locked to make the playoff. Golden takes over. They beat Tulane. Yay, wonderful. You beat a Power 5 team. Huge upset against Georgia. And then it seems like the minute after that, no one wants to talk about like the great things that Ole Miss has done. They just want to talk about is the assistant coach is going to be allowed to coach in the next round of the game. And we talked about this in our recap episode. I would be telling them, like, again, my contract has not fully started with you. I am not obligated to hold on to that contract. I still have an out. If you aren't going to let me coach in this game, pound sand.
Well, Pete Golding mentioned during the press conferences yesterday that he isn't actually the one making decisions, and they're technically under the contract with LSU. So it's all a weird environment of who's actually coaching. And then you pop up today, recording this Sunday night, that Charlie Weiss Jr. is allegedly a candidate for the offensive coordinator spot with the Giants, but they don't have a head coach yet. So because he coached, Jackson Dart, so it's just like, could he even stay on? What other coaches? I mean, I saw the running backs coach say he's no longer coaching Ole Miss. He's going to LSU after beating Georgia, so he's cutting it basically halfway short. They run away with the national championship. Joe Cox and their guys are still in between, and then Charlie Weiss has spent most of the time going back and forth, but he's now a candidate potentially for OC job with the Giants, but they don't have a head coach. It just adds wrinkle after wrinkle, which we've got away from the point of why aren't we playing for this season?
Right.
Why are we all focused on next season? And I think the game has got to a point where everybody now is focused on next season as opposed to actually finishing the current season, the current team. Even in the NFL, you don't have this much drama and chaos. Yeah, maybe there's rumors of someone so going to be taking a job and moving on, but they still coach through. You're not having to recruit for both. You're not having to go through free agency for both. So it's actually much more of an insane balance. And the fact that they're even rivals on top of that adds more shenanigans, probably the best word you can put in play. And as we mentioned in our recap episode, Ole Miss's AD is even looking at tampering, charges toward LSU and Lane Kiffin for his current players and current, coaches that aren't technically under contract or in a contract agreement with LSU. So it's so weird. And that's where we mentioned, going into the preview of the Sugar Bowl, where isn't Ole Miss kind of like America's team? As amazing as Indiana's run's been, Ole Miss has become America's team just due to the coaching chaos that's in place and how it's the players really and whoever wants to stick around and coach for them. So it's just it's an underarching and underlying factor that comes in the ball game. Getting down to the X's and O's, you kind of look at Trinidad Chambliss riding the wave, won a D2 national title last year at Fair State, has a chance to win a national championship, or at least in contention for right now at the FBS level, not even the SES level, but the FBS level with Ole Miss. And he played out of his mind versus Georgia and played really, really, really good in the first matchup versus Georgia. Can he keep playing at that same level of 300 plus passing yards, 50 yards rushing, multiple touchdowns, and no turnovers, and making the right decisions and using his legs? Yeah, they had 200-yard receivers versus Georgia. AC ran for 98, as we talked about in our recap. They had offensive explosion everywhere, and they still only beat the Dogs by 3. And they really never, outside of the fumble, they didn't have any other mistakes. How are they going to keep that focus and that drive and that execution versus a Miami defense that has been fantastic down the stretch? If you watch the film, Ole Miss's offensive line didn't dominate Georgia's front seven. Chambliss just ran away from some of the pass rushes. There was multiple key plays on third and fourth down where he just ran away and created it on the fly and the ad lib breakdown mentality. It wasn't a 3-step drop and throw or passers getting home. His legs created it. So how is Mesidor, how is Reuben Bain Jr. and that defensive line for Miami going to contain him and keep him in the pocket and force earlier throws? Because if his legs are as prevalent on Thursday night out there in Arizona, he's going to run away from him. And he's in the secondary, which with the defensive line that good for Miami and has been all year, the secondary has been able to jump shorter routes, play a little bit, more focused on the quarterback and the throw as opposed to playing in space. How are they going to be able to react playing in space where receivers are drifting, running backs are drifting, and who's going to find that open space and settling down and catching the ball, and then the Hurricanes tackling? That's going to be the variable we're looking at. If you look back at the Miami versus Ohio State game, Julian Sain didn't use his leg much. He was kept in the pocket. And he was forced to throw quickly. Chambliss can get outside that pocket, outside that traditional NFL-ish pass rush. That's the variable that's going to come into play. As great as the pass rush can be, if the quarterback has athletic ability to get outside of it and run, how are the two of them and the rest of that cohort of Hurricanes going to be able to force him to throw on schedule and let the secondary play downhill? Miami's secondary has been looking at the quarterback and looking at the backfield and knowing that it's 3 seconds, ball's gone. 3 seconds, ball's gone. What are they going to do if it's 4-5-6, and they're drifting, trying to cover the backside or wherever? That's where Ole Miss and that's where Travis Chambliss have had success, not just versus Georgia, but the entire season. So that's the first thing I'm looking at. And also the Ole Miss offense of just, you know what? We're supposed to lose this game. Who cares? Let's just go out there and chuck it around and see what happens. The offensive line's not dominant, but with the threat of the passing game, the threat of Chambliss' legs allows Lacey and the bubble screens, the short passing game to be explosive. So you know what? Anything in that playbook for Ole Miss, let it out. Dictate, be aggressive. You have nothing to lose. You have no reason to hold anything back or be conservative. Attack the Hurricanes. On the other side, Carson Beck, you're getting a chance. Last year, you played Ole Miss in Oxford, and yes, it was in a complete downpour, but you got destroyed. You were making bad throws, receivers dropping passes. You have been, happy feet in the pocket. There is film on you versus Ole Miss and how you failed. Now, I'm going to say it's not to be a failure, but Georgia's offense did do anything, and you were making bad decisions. You were getting sacked. Offensive line played terrible. Georgia couldn't run the ball. How do you redeem yourself with this Miami football team? And if I'm Mario Cristobal, if I'm Dawson, the offensive coordinator, I'm taking that film. And I'm looking at it like, all right, here is what we saw, and here's where we failed. Here's where we had success. How do we learn from that experience? Different team, different set of characters, but the philosophy is the same. You were in the situation against a Pete Golding defense. You have viable, tangible evidence of that situation. And the year before at Georgia, when you played Ole Miss, you put a 52 on them in Athens. You've seen a Pete Golding defense. Where do you take the positives and where do you take the opportunities you learn from them and be able to put it into play on Thursday night in Arizona? This is not an unknown situation for Carson Beck. This is an unknown situation for Dawson and the rest of the supporting cast. And even if you want to throw into it, C.J. Daniels played at LSU. He faced Ole Miss when he was at LSU. He's seen that kind of Pete Golding defense. So there is some learning, there's some transition that can be brought into play on Thursday night. And that's why I have a significant impact that Ole Miss's defense is going to have to elevate their game. Pete Golding's going to have wrinkles because there's good and there's bad on tape in live fire exercises that you're going to have to be able to be prepared for. Does Miami have the better athletes? Yes. Does the better offensive line? Yes. Do you have the two dominant pass rushers? Yes. But the game experience, how does that transport? Because Carson Beck had a heck of a cast with them in 2023. That offense was kicking in high gear, played fantastic. Then Ole Miss went to the portal. We saw the portal players last year. That defense changed up. There was a definite downgrade from Carson Beck in that Georgia offense. How does he learn and how do the coaches from Miami take that experience and layer it on? And as Pete Golding and his defensive staff, which all of them have stayed from last year and this year, layer it on and say, hey, we had success here. How do we add this wrinkle? We saw maybe we got exposed here. How do we over and readjust and bring a different look? That's where this comes into play. I'm actually really excited to see it. Everyone's looking forward to Carson Beck versus Georgia, but you're seeing Carson Beck versus a team that he's seen 2 times already. And now it's a third scenario. Where are the adjustments in the chess play from that perspective? I think that's going to be the deciding factor. In the end, I think Miami has the better players across the board. And they were put in, and everyone thought they shouldn't have been, but then the committee put them at the last end, which they should have been because they were better than Notre Dame. They beat them on the field. How do you keep validating your existence? You were put in on the last week, basically, because of a bunch of other circumstances. Maybe you should have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame beforehand. That's a different story for a different day. but now you're in. Keep playing the money, putting in the heavy hand. If you're in Vegas right now, you're playing with house money, you're throwing money to the center of the table, you're playing every hand. Be aggressive. Even though you're going to be the favorite in the game, do not shy away. What got you to beat A&M and what got you to beat Ohio State is the exact same mentality you have to bring into the desert on Thursday night to play Ole Miss. Because if not, Ole Miss will take advantage of their shortcomings and their unpredictability and their free hand and go at you and take you down. Cristobal's been there. He's had more success as the head. He's had more success as the head coach and more experience at Oregon and Miami. Pete Golding is in his third game as the head coach. I think the head coaching experience from Cristobal will come into play. Having a more experienced quarterback in Carson Beck will come into play, and just I'm going to say the manliness of Miami and not having the chaos around them is going to allow them to be a little more focused and driven in this football game. It'll be a fun one to watch. Do not take the under. But I expect Miami to win this football game, and Carson Beck playing for a national championship and the Hurricanes playing for a national championship down in Miami. Do not leave that factor out. That is something else in the back of their minds. In their home stadium, we talk about in the NFL, so and so can play in their home stadium in the Super Bowl. We have a legit case right now where Miami can play a home game and a national championship game in their stadium. Granted, regular season is never actually full. It's like maybe 55% capacity, but this is a chance right now. You sleep in your own bed, travel to the game in Miami Gardens. You know the routine. You get through this hurdle in Arizona. You are in a comfortable situation in Miami Gardens on January 19th, playing for a natty. And then the U will officially be back. Give me the Hurricanes. Give me the Hurricanes to cover. This will be fun, but Miami too much for Ole Miss with all the chaos going outside the program. Good run from Ole Miss. Hats off to you. Serious, respect. But the Hurricanes finally return, and the U is officially back by winning this game and playing for a national championship on January 19th.
The fun thing is with Ole Miss, and it seems like everyone has a talking point about something other than what they're accomplishing on the field, whether they bring up the coaching, whether they bring up, who they beat, whether or not, they are productive. I'm saying this as I'm watching, as people are starting to talk about these games and collecting as much information as possible. It goes back to the same thing I said prior to the Sugar Bowl. National pundits aren't choosing Ole Miss again. They're not picking them. And everyone else is kind of pointing to Miami and saying, hey, Miami's going to be the one that'll win this game and get to play the home game in Miami Gardens there. I look at Ole Miss and I feel like there's a substantial amount of bulletin board material with this. And it is a possibility that Ole Miss is internalizing every single thing that's being negatively said about them or something other than everyone just giving them their flowers. It needs to be like this with Ole Miss. They beat Georgia. They beat Tulane. End of the day, no excuses. You won the football games. And that's it. Move on. Move on past all the other narratives and what have you on there. But no one's doing that. No one's doing that. And then I look at Miami and the questions people are asking, Miami defensively has been absolutely on fire, but they're going against an Ole Miss defense that I don't necessarily think is as good as what they faced in Ohio State. And they're going against an Ole Miss defense that isn't going to have the benefit of the win that was happening over at Kyle Field. They're going up against an opportunity to really flex that offense. This is the type of game where we need to see Miami and Mario Cristobal show you what type of offense they're capable of doing. You're playing this game indoors. You're playing in Arizona. You need to let Malachi Tooney run like crazy. You need to let him turn this into a track meet. You need to let Mark Fletcher pound the ball in between the tackles there. You saw what Ole Miss was giving up at the line of scrimmage to Nate Frazier before he went out. I think Mark Fletcher could do just the same pretty easily in this football game here. Carson Beck, as long as you don't make mistakes, as long as you're protecting the football, not turning it over, and taking your opportunities when you get there, this is every opportunity here. But again, no one's giving Ole Miss a chance. Everyone's always saying this. And we make the comparisons now from the college football playoff to the NCAA March Madness tournament. And we talk about Cinderellas. Ole Miss is probably about the closest you're ever going to get to a Cinderella story. The problem is that there's one major issue with Cinderellas. It strikes midnight at some point in time. And as much as I would love to believe in Ole Miss, as much as I would love to sit there and tell people that they would have, because they're only going to have about 6 days to kind of turn around, prepare for this game. And with all of the craziness that's there, it's not 10 days, it's not 11 days in between games where you can internalize all that, prepare that us against the world mentality, because it was everyone else and they're gifting you that win. Miami's feeling the same way. No one thought that we should be here. Half the country thinks Notre Dame should have been in over us, and we've gone to Texas and beat A&M. We went and faced Ohio State, who was undefeated up until the Big Ten title game. We took care of business in both places, and they won. I think that only one of these two teams can feel enough disrespect to internalize, and I hate to say it, but right now it's 11:59, and the clock is about ready to strike midnight on the Ole Miss season. It's going to be a memorable season. It's going to be one we look back and reflect on and say how great it was, and that Ole Miss achieved something remarkable, absolutely remarkable, with all sorts of chaos and uncertainty surrounding that program. And Golden has done a phenomenal job. I can't wait to see what he does next year with this Rebels team. But I got Miami win this game. I think Miami's got the athletes. And again, this game is won at the line of scrimmage. Miami's got the advantage on the offensive line, and they got the advantage on the defensive line. Game's won in the trenches. I'm going with Miami. I'll take the over and Miami to cover in this football game.
You know, you said something was funny there about the Cinderella. It just dawned on me, isn't it? 3 of the 4 teams in the Final Four didn't even play for their conference championship. Not even, not, didn't even play. So it kind of also adds a wrinkle. Does the conference championship even mean anything anymore? Because like in the NFL, there is no like, do you win the NFC North? Like outside like the NFC South, where there are 3 teams under 500, and somebody has to win it. They're not winning the Super Bowl. They're coming out going to the NFC Championship game, but they're in the playoffs just because they won the conference. But there's other teams that may be in a better league. Just winning conference. Are we getting away from that luxury, that prestige? Because now I'm focused on winning a national championship. Does it matter? It's like, you know what? The way there's no divisions anymore. It's just a straight up top 2 in the league make it in, and then everybody else sort of filters out. Ole Miss, they lost to Georgia and they didn't play Alabama. They didn't go to the SEC championship, but now here they are. They got a revenge against Georgia and they go to the semifinal. Miami didn't play Duke or Virginia, but had 2 losses in the league to other teams. They are the other 2 teams in the ACC championship didn't even make the playoff. They get in. Ohio State and Indiana. Oregon finished third. Oregon's probably has the most validity, but it's Ole Miss still has 1 loss. Like it's just the conference championship games go away. And if we expand the playoff, does it really mean that much to get a trophy? We just do it like, hey, you know what? You won the league, you get a trophy, or you have a split championship and you make the playoff. That's all that matters. In the NFL, you're not getting division trophies. You just win the division and you move on with your life and you go into the playoff. But the Super Bowl is still an NFC championship, and the Super Bowl is still what matters. Or the AFC championship is what matters. The ACC, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the soon-to-be reborn Pac-12, the Sun Belt, etc. This is where we put too much effort into winning a conference title, but the goal for all the fans is to win a national championship. And as great as it is, you know what? Like Indiana winning a Big 10 title hadn't happened in forever. It's amazing for them. And we'll talk about that game in a second. But this kind of correlates. With Ole Miss fans, you make the Final Four, but if you don't win and you don't play for the SEC, is it a failed season? You don't have a trophy, or is it actually a better achievement? Would you rather play in the Final Four and not win an SEC, or not play for an SEC title and not win a national championship, but you have a Sugar Bowl trophy in hand? Like the scope and the perspective of the end of the season is going to be a lot different going forward. And this is one of those grand schemes.
I think it's because the 2025 season has been sheer chaos, and that's a hard way to look at it.
And to your point, I think we can make this a bigger case, but from a player's perspective, now with the transfer portal where you can transfer whatever the heck you want, you don't have to stay out anymore, and NIL and fans expectations. New fans, like every fan wants to win a national championship, but it's unrealistic. Only one team's going to win the national championship.
Hmm.
We could talk about this during the offseason, but really, what defines a successful season? And every team, every fan base is going to have their beer goggles, for lack of a better term, in a different perspective. Back in the day, before we move on, Georgia beat everybody on their schedule. They're 12-2, I think. Yeah, 12-2. You win the SEC, you beat every rival, but because they didn't win a national championship, that is a failure of a season in most people's eyes. In the past, that is actually the best season in Georgia, history outside of 1982. Ohio State last year, you had 2 losses, but then you run the table, win 4 games, and win a national championship. Prior to that, 2 losses. Anything before that, without even playing for a
Hmm.
Big Ten title, that's a fireable offense, and actually kind of was prior to that for Ryan Day. So their house as we move forward, there has to be a reset from fans' perspectives and teams' perspectives. And one thing that popped before we move on to the old Indiana Oregon game, we have 31% of Division One athletes, whether FBS or FCS, already in the portal. And it is January 4th, and the portal opened 2 days ago. That is 31% of all football players in those two respective divisions in the portal. And that doesn't include those spots are going to be taken up because you have incoming high school seniors taking those spots. Are you trying to jump and run for individual success or team success? Are you trying to get a paycheck or are you trying to win as a team? And where's your personal success and where's the team success? And guys are going to be out of a job or playing D2 football because they want to jump thinking they're better than they are instead of looking at current team success. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. I think it's something really interesting to see if they continue, if playoff expands, and it will expand to 16. Where is success measured for every program going forward? Because right now, Ole Miss, this is the greatest season of all time. There's national championships in the 60s, but this season in 2025 is better than those national titles in the 60s, in my opinion, because the competition is better and the talent pool is better. But with that said, we can move on to the other matchup in the semifinal. But this is a lot to unpack and how we measure success going forward because Ole Miss, you should not even win or lose or draw from Miami or Ole Miss. This is a very successful season for both programs that you should build off of and praise and celebrate for years to come.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this too, Fresh, and I think that it's something that we struggle with at times because both of us are fans of elite programs. Both brought up Georgia to start off with, as you're a fan of Georgia and I'm a fan of Ohio State here. And we both carry those level of expectations with our fandom. But if we were, again, a fan of Georgia Tech or we are a fan of, you know, I don't know, West Virginia or Iowa or Nevada or UNLV or USC, UCLA, whatever program you are, I think that I think there's always going to be a set of fans who are just completely irrational, bandwagon, never going to see anything through their team other through team colored glasses, who always think that your team's going to win the national championship. I point down to a team in Gainesville that if you talk to Gainesville fans and anyone that's a Florida Gator fan, a lot of times what they'll say is that, oh, we're going to win a national title. I can still remember listening to fans talk about getting Graham Mertz and how Graham Mertz was going to be the second coming in Gainesville. So guess what? Not happening. I think it all depends on who you are a fan of and if you can be realistic about your program there. Nebraska fans, they get it. They get that they've fallen off the top of the mountaintop. Iowa fans, I think that they would just be happy for a guy to throw, 3,000 yards in a season for their quarterback. I think that it all depends on perspective of each individual fan bases. And we talked a little bit about with BYU. But again, like you said, conversation for another day and in the off season here as well. Let's go to the second semifinal game. It's the Peach Bowl. This is going to be played Friday night. The Oregon Ducks, Hoosiers, earlier in the year, as a 4-point favorite in this game. They met all the way back. It feels like forever ago, but also doesn't feel that long ago. October 11th in Eugene, Oregon. Indiana, 30-20 winners in that football game. Indiana held Oregon to 260 yards of total offense in that football game. And you take a look what they were able to do. It probably is one of Fernando's worst games, but again, you force Dante Moore to throw 2 interceptions in that game. You see that you were able to protect the quarterback, and Indiana picked up 6 sacks in that football game to really put the pressure on Oregon. I think the question dares to be asked. This game is going to come down to, can Oregon protect Dante Moore in this passing attack? And is Oregon able to run the football against the Indiana front four?
Well, you hit it right there at the very end. This the only factor in this game is the Oregon offense. We've already seen Oregon's defense is very, very good. And outside the last like 8 to 15, 13 minutes of the fourth quarter, they had a pick six Oregon did. It made 20-20 with about 10, 12 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Then the Oregon defense kind of faded. Indiana and Fernando Mendoza stepped up. But that offense for Oregon was not efficient. 17 points is not going to win you a game these days very often. It can in times, but it's not going to be consistent. And after what we saw versus Texas Tech, granted Texas Tech was a good an elite defense. We just haven't seen Oregon play at the level of the Chip Kelly Oregon days. I think we see Marcus Mariota, we see Joey Harrington, we see Dylan Gabriel, we see Bo Nix time. There are Achilles Smith even. Oregon offenses have always been known to put up ridiculous amount of points, regardless of the opposition. Justin Herbert even. Dante Moore, it's been a different Oregon team. It's been a defensive first running game approach, a much more of a conservative pro style offense. They're not putting up 45, 50 points every single week. Have they had spurts? Yeah, they looked fantastic versus USC. But as we know, Lincoln Riley and defense are about as relatable as heaven and hell. It's this team it's the one thing I think Dan Lanning needs is the offense to show up when it matters. They did not show up for the Indiana defense earlier in Eugene. They have been hit or miss every single week. Yeah, they were able to flex their muscle against JMU, but whatever. I don't care. That offense was sloppy and inefficient on simple plays versus Texas Tech. It's not like David Bailey and Romello Height and Jacob Rodriguez were down Dante Moore's throat every single day on New Year's Day. There were throws to be made, and there were receivers open. They just could not execute. Dante Moore's, it was bad. The offensive line played, but it was just a very dysfunctional unit across the board. Now, I'm going to give you're from the West Coast. It was a noon start on New Year's Day. We'll throw all of it out there. But the defense came to play. So you can't just say your team wasn't prepared and wasn't ready for the time change because the defense played one heck of a ball game and they shut out an opponent. So Dan Lanning, I know your offensive coordinator took the job at Kentucky. He's been the head coach there. But there's got to be a much more focused and driven effort from the players. Because in the end, we're at the point right now in the Final Four, players decide the game. Players decide your fate. Coaches can call plays, but you've been in the offense. You can check out of stuff. You can give looks. Players got to make plays. Receivers got to catch the ball. Offensive line's got to block. Running backs got to pick up blitzes. Quarterbacks got to make the reads. This is not week 1 or week 0 where we're just getting the kinks out. You've got to be ready. This is also your third playoff game. You should be ready back into full game mode. Your legs under, you're ready to rock and roll after having a couple of weeks off. But Dante Moore and that receiving core, Kenyon Sadiq, and the running back core have got to be ready to go. I will also say, Oregon, you've had some receivers, obviously injuries there. If those guys can get healthy, that obviously changes the dynamic. But y'all have been Oregon's not recruiting, 2-star walk-ons. There's 4 stars, there's 5 stars there. It's time for the boys to step up and be big adults and make plays. And you're going against a very good Indiana secondary, but you've got to be able to show up and make plays on game day. So this is a test right now for the Oregon offense for the first time in decades being called out to show up. Because I know that defense is gonna, they're gonna be there and they're gonna contest. They've seen Mendoza, they've seen the Indiana offense. They know what they're gonna get, and I got a feeling Dan Lanning's gonna have a couple of wrinkles for him, as well as Signetti, the offensive staff, and Shanahan are gonna have wrinkles, for Lanning. But I have more confidence in the Oregon defense to show up on Friday night than I do the Oregon offense. And Dante Moore, if you want to be taken in the top 5 overall in the draft, regardless if it's this year and you want to go play for the Jets at number 2 overall, or you want to go next year. This is something that NFL scouts are looking at. Can you show up in the big time when you have a second time versus an opponent when everything's on the line? You have to show up in the NFL right now. The playoffs are what matters. If you can deliver when it's big time, that's what they're looking for. They don't care what you do in September. They're looking what you do against an elite opponent when the lights are shining the brightest. And the lights will shine super bright on Friday night in Atlanta in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Can you deliver against an elite defense? And Dante Moore, if you want to become a big-time NFL draft pick, regardless if it's this year or next year, you need to make the big boy throws And if you're the receivers or running backs and tight ends, you got to make the big boy catches because Indiana's not going to, they're not shying away from anybody. They've beaten Ohio State. They just ran over Alabama with a Ford truck 5 times. They don't care. They're coming for you. So you have to be ready to show up and get it done. On the flip side, Kurt Signetti, Mendoza, keep riding the wave. I know Ole Miss is America's story, but you guys are just about as America's story as Ole Miss is. Once, you're the underdog no matter what you says until you win the title. And then when ever will hate you after the fact. Just people go out there and keep doing what you're doing. Play offense. Your offensive line playing fantastic. You're running the ball with authority. Your receivers are making catches. Your defense is, I think, taking a back seat, which they shouldn't be, to your offense is unheralded. But Fisher and Kamara and then Pons and the entire secondary and the linebacking core, go out there and just attack. Attack, attack, attack. You've seen the Ducks before. You went into their house, into the impenetrable Outson Stadium up there in, the People's Republic of Oregon, and you took care of business. What's any different than going into Mercedes-Benz and doing the same thing? If you want to be an elite program, here's your chance to also keep building that because maybe there are some people out there in the country that are still like, it's still Indiana. You go out there and you go play for a national championship and you beat Oregon, who's another named program, you're going to silence every doubt. You went and you beat Alabama, you beat Ohio State, you have a chance of beating Oregon, you're beating brands. If you get Ole Miss or Miami for the national championship, that's a lot of brand. We talk about logo games on this podcast a lot. That's a lot of logos you've beaten.
Mhm.
Don't be scared. You have nothing to fear because you're playing with house money, the same thing. Everyone thinks, oh, it's Indiana. Go out there and light people up. Pour it on. Make a statement if you have a chance. And Morris has gone on as well, gaining much more respect for Kurt Signetti. And one thing that kind of also brought me to that fact, number one, he's confident that he wins. He said, look me up, Google me in the back where you got hired back at Indiana 2 years ago. But then the other thing about, I'm not overcoaching my players. I'm not having my coaches overcoach. I know who we are. We're gonna go through. We're gonna practice the way we practice. We're gonna do what we have to do. I don't need to be out there for 5 hours to practice. If we're gonna get it done in 2 hours, we're gonna get it done in 2 hours. I'm gonna let my coaches do some film, be with their families, and let my players be normal kids and be human beings. And that has obviously paid off to see whether he's at Elon or James Madison or here at Indiana. He's won, and the guys show up and play for him. So maybe that's a factor. As much as we want to be toughness and I love Kirby's, Bloody Tuesdays and hitting and being physical and all that. But you know what? The past 2 years, the guys have been exhausted and haven't played a bowl game. Maybe there has to be a fine line, and maybe Kurt Cignetti's found that of finding a fine line of being tough, but also being focused on my guys are ready for game day. And I've not seen Indiana walk into a game intimidated or scared since he stepped on campus. And they have been healthy. They have not had banged up players, and they have shown up when it matters, and they've won big. This is going to be a classic. I got a feeling this is going to be a great game into the fourth quarter. I've gone back and forth on this one. As we talked about it as well many times, but playing a team the second time in a season is difficult. But in the end, who's the quarterback? And I trust Mendoza over Dante Moore. And I'm taking Indiana to win. I'm taking Indiana to go play Miami for a national championship in Miami Gardens and have the Hoosiers and the Canes for a natty setup, which would be a lot of fun. Oregon, Dan Lanning, great job. But I just don't think you had the quarterback this year. If you had Nix or Gabriel, a different story. This quarterback is not what you had in the past, and that's going to be the deciding factor. Give me Indiana to win, and we're going to have a fun national championship between Indiana and Miami down the road.
Yeah, I think I'll give you Knicks on that one there, Fresh, because Knicks is balling out there in the NFL, but I've seen enough of Dylan Gabriel in my life here.
NFL and college are different. NFL
Right,
and college are different. We see a lot of college quarterbacks who put up tons of numbers and go to the NFL, and they can't do a diddly squat. So
right.
this is
And
Dylan Gabriel in college, especially Oregon and Oklahoma, was very, very good.
he was
Yeah,
good, but I still will
he
take Dante Moore over him any day. Now, Knicks is a different story.
funny for it now, before I hand it out to you. NFL season outside of the Ravens and Steelers game that's still currently ongoing while we're recording is wrapped. New York Jets had the second overall pick. The New York Jets need a quarterback. Dante Moore, I'm gonna tell you right now, unless he goes and balls out and wins a national championship, probably going to be there next year at Oregon too. I don't see him wanting to go to the NFL and go play for the New York Jets. So
Yeah.
Oregon fans, take it in stride. This is not a one and done. I got a feeling he'll learn and mature and come back with a much stronger receiving core next year and be able to put. This is a maybe ahead of the curve element, ahead of where they should be for the offense for Oregon. With that said,
Yeah, and you got Achilles Smith Jr. another year where he'll sit and wait a little bit
well,
for his
you
turn.
just go send him to the Bengals. He can back up Joe Burrow and bring back horrific memories for the Bengals.
Yeah, I'll take it, man. Although my Browns did beat the Bengals to end the year. Well, let's go into this here fresh as we diverge into other things here. I'll say this. Oregon's impressed me because of the play of their front four. Their front four was not this way last year. It wasn't like this when they were Big Ten champions. And I think that they're one of those few teams that air was let out of the balloon last season. Win the Big Ten title game, and then they get stomped in the Rose Bowl as every team that got a bye lost in the first or in the second round there. And I think that Oregon was the ones that kind of limped back from Pasadena to Eugene. And as they're limping back, as they're waddling back with their feathers plucked, they're sitting there talking to themselves and saying, never again are we going to go into a game where we're not prepared to play. And Oregon has showed, again, level of competition. James Madison, okay, you could probably prepare at about 60% and you'd be just fine against JMU. Texas Tech's a different story. And I know everyone's going to say, well, and we did too. The offense was okay, but when you force 4 Texas Tech turnovers, they're the first team to shut out Texas Tech on this season. They're the first one. Well, I think we said that Texas Tech hadn't scored less than like 30 points in a game this season, and they blank them. That shows me that Oregon really took their preparation for that game seriously. I think the same thing is going to be true for Oregon against this Indiana team. I think they're going to prepare really, really well for this. Take a look back at that film from and say, what did we do good? What did we do? What could we have improved upon here as well? With that being said, Indiana might be one of the greatest stories ever told in the history of college football. And I look at this not because of I have a strong fascination and love for an underdog story. Hence, see the Cincinnati year where they made the college football playoff, and I just set the pen on the table for Cincinnati. I love a good underdog story. And really, Indiana is a true underdog story for what they've gone through with Kirk Signetti. I guarantee you, when the world heard that Indiana was hiring Signetti, they'd be like, who the bleep is that guy? And I just think of the picture or the images from the movie Major League being like, this guy, they still suck. And this guy's working at Tire World. I got a guy on the other line with some white walls. And then you look what they did with Rourke, and they played Notre Dame tough, but they lost, and Indiana lost. And now that they've done this, they've had Mendoza, they've had Hemby, they have Cooper Jr., they have Surratt, they have all these guys, they have these great players. They're on there. And still to this day, there are people out there that want to discount. They're 14-0. They've won the Big Ten title game. They just eviscerated Alabama, and you want to discount what Indiana has done this season? You're out of your mind. Like, if you don't start putting respect on Indiana's name, I don't even know if I can take you seriously anymore if you're a college football fan. I think this game is going to be an instant classic. I really do. I do not think that Oregon gets Alabama and completely taken to the woodshed, and it is an ugly, ugly game. I think Dan Lane's too good of a coach. He has his players too well prepared, and I think they've learned a lesson. I think Indiana's a team on a mission. Don't know. I think we may be looking at 2022 is Georgia's first national title.
Well, 2021 and
21. So the
21
21
season,
team,
22.
yeah, 21 season, said in October of that season, there was no one that was going to beat Georgia in that year. Like Georgia was going to win a national title in that one. 19, LSU. No one was beating LSU. Ohio State last year when they played their A game, no one was going to beat Ohio State. I feel like this Indiana team is a team of destiny. I know you said Ole Miss is America's team, but this is a team that is a true underdog story and will make one heck of a 30 for 30 10 years from now if they're still doing it, or if ESPN would ever do a 30 for 30 about someone other than a team outside the Southeastern Conference. We'll see
Well,
about
they have.
that.
They've done
I know.
SMU and Miami twice.
And
And they
Ohio
haven't done,
State
yeah, they haven't done 30 to 30
and Notre
in
Dame.
the SEC.
Yeah. I look at all of these things and I say Indiana's going to win this football game. I think it's going to be a late field goal. I think it's going to be something very, very close to the end. but give me Indiana play for a national title. I have the same matchup as you, Indiana, Miami, national title, Miami Gardens.
Well, two things I want to end this on. First off, folks, Seth is obsessed with underdogs, and he actually wrote the screenplay for Dodgeball, the true underdog story.
Yep.
It was stolen from him off his zip drive, so that's why he didn't get a cash in on the royalties. But he is actually the one that put that out there, the Dodge dip and all the fun stuff. That's all Seth.
That's
And
why I quote, you
secondly,
don't bleed, make me bleed my own blood.
getting back to reality, Oregon has had two defensive backs jump in the portal after beating Texas Tech. This is also a problem with where we are. We mentioned earlier, we are more focused on next season than currently playing NAB. So Oregon is going to play in the semifinal, potentially play for a national championship. And two of your defensive backs are like, you know what? I don't want to be part of this run. I'm putting myself in the portal.
It's the dumbest thing ever.
It's like the NFL saying, you know what? I'm on the 53-man roster for Chicago Bears or the LA Rams or Pittsburgh Steelers or whoever, Buffalo Bills. It's like, you know what? I'm going to put myself into free agency earlier and get money now instead of actually going to play for a championship and getting a ring and being part of a team victory. Make it make sense. Now, I know I'll give Danny Lanning credit. He came up when he talked about during his press conference leading up to Texas Tech of having the first round the week of the Army Navy game, the second round the week of the current first round right now, the playoffs, and the national championship being played on New Year's Day. And then having the portal open on January 2nd and having the portal from the 2nd to the 16th. There you solve all the problems because the game is over. The season's over. You prime national champion, and then you go in the portal. But right now, we have kids making decisions for third of the depth chart or fourth of the depth chart, or teams that are good. Like, you know what? Like Parker Livingston, the receiver for Texas. He said he was asked to leave Texas because they're going to go out and get different receivers. He didn't want to leave, but he was told to get himself in the portal. Granted, they're not in the playoff, but what world are we in where there's actively a regular season happening and we are making roster decisions with teams actively still playing? That is going to be an impact because the depth of Oregon's secondary is now in play versus a very lethal passing attack for Indiana. Now, Dan Lanning did joke. He's like, I might go out there and give it a try to fight in the secondary, or at least have one of my coaches go out there. And Signetti was on the WebEx with him and kind of laughed. But that's kind of where we are as coaches, where all these four coaching staff are still in it, are not only actively either keeping the staffs together, keeping a recruiting class together, keeping a team together from jumping in the portal, but also trying to coach and prepare for the next week's game. We've got to solve this problem because it is killing college football, and it's not really the NIL factor. It's more the transfer portal because kids now, if you're recruiting a guy, he's gone the next year as opposed to, you know what, if he's transferring as a 2-year buffer, that's the biggest play. The 2-year rule, having to sit out and then play a year, would deter a lot of players from jumping the portal consistently and immediately because they have to think, to sit out a year. We've got to get back to at least having a consequence for jumping in the portal as opposed to just becoming a free for all. People are getting paid regardless. I don't care who that is, where it is, whether it's a McDonald's bag of cash or a corporate sponsor coming through a collective. That's not going to change it. But it's the ability to jump every single year and impact and try to get as much money as fast as you possibly can. I'm a capitalist. I love the money. Get it, but you have to have a buffer in there of the 1-year sit-up rule for the continuous transfer. That is what's going to really slow this whole thing down and actually cause players to play through a national championship. The schedule is what it is. The coaches wanted the single portal, the single signing day. I get it. But if you can find ways to have something to sort of safeguard against this chaos that we're having in the playoff, it would make the competitive nature, and it would also reduce some of the stress these coaching staffs have at this time of the year. And yes, I know, well, coaches jump too. Coaches do jump. There's got to be solves there. But having players actively playing for a national championship, but wanting to leave that team defeats the purpose of playing for a national championship in a team sport. And that's got to be taken care of. And it's got to be found with sensible addressing from all aspects immediately, or the sport will be ruined going forward. That's my soapbox. I'm done.
I would say this, Fresh. I'm with you on this. So they gotta make some changes. If a coach is getting promoted, that's one thing. I'm always up for a promotion. Ryan Hartline going to USF, OC to head coach. I don't know how much of a promotion that truly is, but again, he's the head coach of a football program now.
You run a
Entitled
program
alone.
like it takes the learning experience. Yeah,
But
I can see that. That's a promotion in the title.
lateral moves, the first rule I'd make is that if you move laterally before the end of before your season is over, and I just say before your season's over, that includes the bowl game. whatever bowl game it is, next year's salary, that's the cost. Your next year's salary, you get zero, you get nothing, you get zip. Because then I make the choice of being committed and honoring a contract. I get it. And the thing that I hate that we're teaching these kids and these adults are showing this to is that when I sign a contract with someone, like I honor it. I honor what the deal is for say, not just to be like, oh, well, hey, like this is a great deal. And then I can take this for it here, but I've made a commitment to these people. Like my commitment doesn't matter anymore. My word doesn't matter to finish it off with as well. It's one thing if you leave and your coach leaves. Same thing with kids, like in the players here. I'm all for like if your coach leaves, I'm all for the portal window opening up and you face no penalty. If for some reason something happens and there's extenuating circumstances, I think you get a one-time free pass to transfer, but make the decision count. After that, then give them, then they're ineligible for NIL or for revenue sharing or what have you for 1 year.
I mean,
Make it
we got
count.
guys out there going for their fourth or fifth or sixth stop. Kind of like Van Wilder at some point eventually left college. And
Eventually
also
graduate.
here's the funny part. It's like, yes, every scholarship, even way back in the day, you signed your letter of intent. It was a 1 year scholarship, but you knew you had 4 years, you had 5 years to complete your 4 years of eligibility at the school with one transfer, whether you had gray shirts, whatever. Now we're getting on 3 reporting of a player re-signs with the school. Or, as we saw, a certain player went to a different school in the transfer portal and signed a 2-year contract. What, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You commit with a commitment to the schools. Like now I have to sign a 2-year contract so I don't jump in the portal again. I thought that was just that should be like I'm committing to the school. I'm there for the duration of my eligibility, and we roll from there. It's becoming, as much as we love the pageantry of college football, this aspect is becoming too much NFL-ish free agency, and even NFL has much more structure around it than the college
Mm-hmm.
football game does, and that becomes a need for a college football commissioner because the NCAA already screwed the pooch with the transfer portal and NIL guidelines because it's not the same for anybody. It's all state related. So we need a college football commissioner to really regulate everything, and that includes the playoff and the playoff committee and all that fun stuff. That's an off-season topic. I know we've gone long-winded, but there's a lot right now that needs to change because it still goes back to the fact that we have 2 players on a team actively in the Final Four that have put themselves in the portal to go somewhere else. And the whole goal is to play for a national championship.
Right. And Fresh, I'm going to leave you with a Tom Callahan quote. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. They're called doctors. Yeah, a lot of people go to college for 7 years. Little Tom Callahan, not big Tom Callahan. So, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. Hey, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, because we're going to drop some NFL content here coming up here, so you don't want to miss that. We're going to preview the national title game. We'll talk all about these games as we get closer and closer to that season. We'll switch over to going full-time NFL playoff materials coming up. If you love the NFL like we do, we love football in general. We're going to do NFL material, and then we're going to start working towards the NFL draft in April. That's always a fun time for us to do. And who knows what other fun stuff we'll find along the way to talk about. So make sure you're locked in up there. So hit the subscribe button. Make sure you go to spinablesports.com. And special thanks to our producer, Drew. Without him, none of this is possible. Follow us and engage with us on the social medias. Fresh, that's all I got for today.
Folks, enjoy it. We got 3 more college football playoff games left in the year, and we have a bunch of playoff games. The games are limited, but they mean so much more. Enjoy them. Be with friends and family because before you know it, we'll be doing Senior Bowl stuff and NFL draft previews and talking about who is the mock draft and who should go to the Raiders and God forbid have to go play for the Jets. But that'll be on our way here very, very soon as we jump into spring. With that said, spinablesports.com, Spinable Sports YouTube channel, at IR Confidence Pod on Twitter and X. You'll find the both of us as well there. And until next time, we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, y'all.